What if the people who raised you were the same ones who never believed in you? I was kicked out of Thanksgiving dinner for being the failure in my family, just a girl who played with code, while everyone else built real careers. What they didn't know is that I secretly owned the company they all worked for. And the next morning, I walked into the boardroom as their new boss. This is not just a story about revenge. It's about reclaiming your voice, your worth, and your power when no one ever expected you to. Stick around because what happens at the end will leave you speechless. Before we dive in, if you've ever been underestimated, overlooked, or doubted by the people closest to you, this story is for you. So hit that subscribe button, give this video a thumbs up, and share it with someone who needs the reminder. Success is the best kind of silence. The clouds over Seattle hung low and heavy, like the weight Charlotte Hayes had carried for years. Thanksgiving afternoon in the Pacific Northwest had its charm. Golden leaves slick with rain, chimneys puffing smoke into the gray. But to Charlotte, today was a performance she'd long stopped auditioning for. She stood quietly at the foot of her parents' front porch, gripping a store-bought pumpkin pie, the cellophane wrap fogged with condensation. She wasn't here for the food, nor for the family reunion. She was here to keep a promise to herself. She was 30, sharp as obsidian, and the founder and CEO of Ethra Health Intelligence, an AI startup revolutionizing diagnostics in underserved hospitals. But to her family, she was still Charlie, the eccentric one who left a six-figure job at Medline Tech to play with algorithms. Her father, a retired surgeon, had called it career suicide. Her mother, more reserved, just kept recommending openings at the hospital cafeteria. None of them knew that Ethra had just finalized the acquisition of 51% of Hayes Biomedical, the family company they still treated like a royal heirloom. Charlotte hadn't told anyone. Not when the first investor signed. Not when the merger talks began. Not even when her name appeared in the shareholder restructuring documents, under the pseudonym CM Hale. She wanted them to see the results, not the hustle. Not the years of coding through midnight migraines. Not the failed pitches or the seed round she built off her own credit score. The warmth of the Hayes home hit her like a wall. Roast turkey, cinnamon, expensive perfume. Inside, relatives mingled with flutes of champagne, while a jazz version of Autumn Leaves played softly. As always, Charlotte arrived alone. And as always, her success arrived unseen. "Charlotte, you made it," her Aunt Grace greeted with that overly cheerful tone reserved for awkward family members. "We weren't sure if you'd still be in." What was it again? San Francisco. No, still doing that startup thing. Seattle, Charlotte corrected gently. "I've been there for 5 years. Grace nodded, not listening. "Well, we're just thrilled you came. But quick heads up, today's kind of a big day for Ava." She motioned toward the living room where Ava, Charlotte's cousin, stood surrounded by admirers, her diamond bracelet catching the chandelier light. "She's being named COO of Hayes Biomedical. Her fiancé, Dylan, just joined as CFO. It's their moment, so maybe keep your tech stuff low-key." Charlotte offered a polite smile. Of course. Wouldn't want to disrupt the celebration. But she already knew. By tomorrow morning, the board would meet with their new majority partner, Ethra. The same board that still thought Ava was next in line to lead. The same family that laughed when Charlotte said AI could transform medicine. Let them celebrate tonight. Let them toast nepotism and call it merit. Charlotte hadn't come back to prove anyone wrong. She'd come back to take what they thought she'd never earn. Dinner was everything Charlotte remembered, and everything she had grown numb to. The table groaned under the weight of roasted turkey, glazed ham, truffle mac and cheese, and wine poured too generously by men who mistook volume for charm. Her mother had arranged name cards again like anyone cared. Charlotte's seat, predictably, was at the far end, right next to the pantry door and across from Great-Aunt Helen, who could barely hear her. From the head of the table, her Uncle Ryan raised a glass. "To family," he said. "And to Ava, who, thanks to her vision and loyalty, will help take Hayes Biomedical to the next level." Applause. Laughter. Oath. Charlotte sipped her wine, silent. Ava, glowing in her beige turtleneck and pearls, beamed under the attention. "And to Dylan, of course," she added sweetly, motioning to her fiancé. "Bringing years of financial expertise to the company. Honestly, we've never been more aligned." "Oh, Charlotte," her aunt chimed in, "are you still doing that analytics thing? We heard you got some funding from, was it a grant? Or a GoFundMe?" She laughed like it was a joke. Charlotte smiled coolly. "Actually, we just closed Series C last month." "Series C? What's that? Some kind of coding club?" Dylan chuckled. "Man, I wish I had the free time to tinker." Her father cleared his throat. "Charlotte, your mother and I were actually thinking. There's an opening in IT support at the hospital. It's stable. Benefits. You don't have to do this tech gamble anymore." A hush spread down the table. Even Ava paused. Charlotte looked at her father, then slowly set down her fork. She could feel the old instinct rising, to shrink, to justify, to prove. But not tonight. "Actually," she said softly, "I'll pass on that. I have a board meeting tomorrow. With Hayes Biomedical, in fact." A few chuckles followed, until Ava raised a curious brow. "I'm sure Dad would have mentioned it if we were meeting with any consultants." "I'm not coming as a consultant." Her aunt's voice sharpened. "Charlotte, please. Let's not turn this into something awkward. Tonight is about Ava." Charlotte stood up. "You're right. It is." "Where are you going?" her mother asked nervously. "Home," Charlotte replied, grabbing her coat. "But remember this moment. Because tomorrow, when you walk into that boardroom, everything you think you know is going to change." "Charlotte," her father began, his voice tight. But Ava's voice cut through like a dagger. "If she wants to be dramatic, let her. She's not even a stakeholder." Charlotte looked at her cousin, then at the family that had boxed her in for decades. She didn't need to argue anymore. The signatures were inked. The contracts were legal. She walked out into the November chill, the sounds of silverware and laughter fading behind her. Tomorrow the real dinner would be served. The morning sun hadn't yet pierced the skyline when Charlotte arrived at the Ethra offices, perched high above downtown Seattle. Frost clung to the windows as the city yawned awake. But inside, her company was already alive. Analysts in motion, projectors flickering to life, and the quiet intensity of a team that knew today would redefine everything. "Good morning, Ms. Hayes." Emma, her chief of staff, greeted with a calm smile, offering her an espresso. "Any updates?" Charlotte asked, settling into her leather chair beneath a wall of digital dashboards. "They've arrived early," Emma said. 9 of them. Your uncle, Ava, Dylan, and 5 board members. They're waiting downstairs." Charlotte exhaled slowly. "Let them wait." Emma didn't flinch. She'd seen Charlotte go from solo founder to one of the most influential names in medtech. And she knew. Charlotte didn't rush. Charlotte stood and walked toward the glass, overlooking the morning mist rolling over the city. This was her world now. Precision, vision, and power earned in silence. Not her parents' dinner table. Not Ava's spotlight. At exactly 9:45, Charlotte adjusted her blazer, checked her lipstick, and nodded. "Bring them up." The boardroom, framed by floor-to-ceiling windows and abstract art, had been arranged with calculated detail. Each chair precisely placed, folders laid out in front of each seat. The company logo glowed faintly on a screen. Ethra Health Intelligence. The elevator dinged. The delegation entered, all business. Then confusion. "Where's the CEO?" Uncle Ryan asked Emma. "We were told this would be handled at the highest level." Emma gestured toward the head of the table. "She's right there." Charlotte rose slowly. "Good morning." Eva blinked. Wait, you're the CEO of Ethra." "I am," Charlotte replied calmly. "As of last quarter, Ethra now owns a controlling interest in Hayes Biomedical." Dylan laughed nervously. "That's not possible. We would have known." "You didn't," Charlotte said, sliding a document across the table. "Because I acquired our voting shares through a holding firm. Hale." That's me. The room fell into stunned silence. Uncle Ryan went pale. One board member coughed. Ava looked like she'd been slapped. This is absurd, Dylan snapped. You went behind our backs. Charlotte interrupted, cool and poised. Behind your assumptions, Dylan. Not your backs. Everything was legal. Transparent. You just didn't think to look for me. Her father's voice broke the silence. Why would you do this? She looked him squarely in the eye. Because when I tried to build something you called it childish. Because when I asked to be heard you dismissed me. So I stopped asking. She pressed a button and charts lit up the room. Hayes Biomedical's declining margins, inefficiencies and innovation gaps. This acquisition isn't revenge. It's survival. And I'm here to lead it. Ava stood abruptly. You can't do this. Charlotte's voice never wavered. I already did. Quick pause. If you're loving this story so far, take a second to comment below. I see you, Charlotte. Just those words. Because for every person who's had to fight to be seen, heard, or taken seriously, this moment is for you. And don't forget to subscribe because the next chapter, it's where the real tables turn. The silence that followed Charlotte's declaration felt thick, charged with disbelief and fear. Ava sank slowly into her chair, her hands trembling ever so slightly as she opened the folder in front of her. Inside were projections, audit reports, and merger terms, all signed, sealed, and legal. I've spent the past year preparing for this, Charlotte said evenly. We conducted due diligence, identified structural weaknesses, and built a rescue plan, one based on merit, not inheritance. Uncle Ryan leaned forward, his face flushed. You've always been brilliant, Charlotte, but this is betrayal. No, Charlotte said, locking eyes with him. This is leadership. You spent decades ignoring my input, dismissing every offer I made to collaborate. I simply stopped asking for permission. Dylan scoffed. You think you're qualified to run Hayes? You haven't even worked in manufacturing. Charlotte stepped back from the table, grabbed the remote, and changed the slide. Ethera has deployed AI-integrated diagnostic systems in over 200 regional hospitals. We've reduced misdiagnoses by 37% and cut operational costs by 22%. We're not just qualified, we're ahead. Her father rubbed his temples, struggling to grasp the new reality. And what are your terms? She folded her arms. Restructuring. Full. The board resigns. Leadership positions will be reassigned based on performance, not family ties. Financial transparency will be enforced. Any nepotism ends today. Ava's voice cracked. You want to erase me? No, Charlotte replied. I want to earn what matters. Something you never had to do. Ava stood. Dad, tell her to stop this. She's your daughter. Uncle Ryan's mouth opened, then closed again. For once, he had nothing to say. Charlotte looked at him, at her father, at the entire board. Every one of them stunned not just by her position, but by the power behind it. They had underestimated her for so long, they never saw her coming. You can agree to the terms now, Charlotte said, or refuse and trigger Clause 14b. That one enacts forced takeover. Believe me, I'd prefer collaboration. The board members exchanged hushed, frantic whispers. Finally, the oldest among them, Mrs. Whitmore, a founding member, cleared her throat. What assurances do we have? Charlotte didn't blink. That I will do what none of you did. I will protect this company's future, not its legacy. After a long pause, Uncle Ryan muttered, We'll sign. As the pen scratched across the signature line, Charlotte felt no triumph, only clarity. The girl they once called naive was now the woman holding their future in her hands. Her father looked up, voice low. Charlotte. We were wrong. She nodded. Yes, you were. Then she turned toward the window, watching Seattle's skyline shimmer beneath the midday sun. No more hiding. No more proving. From this moment on, they'd remember exactly who she was. By the end of the meeting, the last signature was sealed, and the boardroom emptied in fractured silence. Charlotte stood alone for a moment, facing the window, her reflection faint against the glass. The skyline blinked back, a quiet reminder that her real work was only beginning. Emma entered, tablet in hand. Legal has filed the new board structure. Transition teams are prepped. And you have 14 missed calls from Dylan. Charlotte raised a brow. Block him. Emma smiled faintly. Already done. Later that afternoon, the official press release went out. Ethra Health Intelligence completes acquisition of Hayes Biomedical. Charlotte Hayes appointed interim CEO during restructuring phase. The media storm was instant. Headlines, interview requests, think pieces. Some praised her brilliance. Others called her ruthless. Charlotte didn't care. Perception wasn't her concern. Performance was. She met with her new leadership team that evening. Hand-picked from both inside and outside the company. Engineers, project leads, product specialists. No empty titles. No legacy appointments. This company nearly crumbled because it rewarded bloodlines over results, Charlotte told them, pacing the sleek new boardroom. That ends now. We lead with data, with accountability, and with purpose. Anyone who can't adjust won't stay. A week later, Charlotte visited one of the company's underperforming plants in Spokane. For the first time in years, factory floor workers were asked their input. Design engineers sat with operators not above them. Efficiency improved in days. She launched an internal mentorship program, targeting young professionals from underrepresented backgrounds. One of the first applicants, Grace Hayes, her teenage cousin who once asked her how to build a website. The same girl who never laughed when others joked about Charlie's failed app. Charlotte personally approved her enrollment. One evening, as Charlotte reviewed quarterly forecasts in her penthouse office, Emma brought in a visitor request. Your cousin Ava, she said carefully. She's downstairs. Says she wants to apologize. Charlotte stared at the screen for a long moment, then said, Tell her I'm not available. She also left this. Emma placed a small envelope on the desk. Inside was a handwritten note. I didn't know how to lead. You showed me. I hope I can learn even now. Charlotte read it twice, expression unreadable. Then she placed it in her drawer. Change wasn't about revenge. It was about choosing the future, even when the past came knocking with regret. As Hayes Biomedical transitioned into Ethra's growing ecosystem, Charlotte never stepped into the limelight. No TED Talks. No business profiles. She stayed behind the results. Precise, consistent, undeniable. But those who had once dismissed her, they now followed her lead. Winter settled over Seattle in a hush of silver fog and quiet nights. It had been 3 months since the acquisition. The headlines had cooled, the news cycle moved on, but within Ethra, transformation was just beginning. Charlotte sat in her corner office, sipping green tea as a rainstorm tapped gently at the windowpane. Across from her, a digital dashboard showed metrics she had once dreamed of. Production up 26%, R&D investments tripled, and employee retention hitting record highs. Still, that wasn't the growth she thought about most. She thought about how she no longer needed to answer every criticism with a presentation. How she stopped checking for validation in her father's silence. She had spent years trying to be seen, and now that she was, it no longer mattered. Because somewhere along the way, Charlotte Hayes had stopped working to prove herself and started working to fulfill herself. Emma stepped in. Your speech at the internal summit. Want to go over your notes? Charlotte smiled. Actually, no notes this time. At the summit, standing in front of hundreds of employees from across the company, she spoke from memory. Not about profit margins or AI deployments, but about possibility. About how she once worked nights in a basement with no funding, no allies, and no safety net. About how innovation doesn't come from people who are always heard, but from those who refuse to stay silent. Afterward, a junior engineer named Zoe approached her. I never saw someone like me run a company like this, she said. It makes me believe I don't have to wait for permission. Charlotte looked at her and said, "Don't. Permission is overrated." At home that evening, Charlotte received a package. Inside was a photo of her and her grandmother from years ago. Tucked behind it, a note in her grandmother's handwriting. "Lead from strength, but live from grace." Charlotte held the photo gently. Her grandmother had always seen her, even when no one else did. 1 week later, Charlotte surprised her team by announcing a new initiative. The Hayes Fund, a venture program investing in women-led health tech startups, prioritizing founders from marginalized communities. It wasn't just a business move. It was her way of creating space for others, the way no one had created for her. She didn't need the spotlight. She needed the impact. And now she had both. That night, Charlotte returned to the same family estate she had left 3 months before. Not for validation but to see Grace. The teenage cousin ran out to greet her, laptop in hand, bubbling with ideas and questions about machine learning. Charlotte smiled, knelt beside her and said, "You don't need to be perfect. You just need to start." As they walked inside together, past the same doors that once symbolized exclusion, Charlotte realized something. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about legacy. 6 months later, the headlines resurfaced. Only this time they didn't focus on scandal or surprise. They spoke of transformation. Charlotte Hayes restructures medical giant and rewrites what leadership looks like. Ethera's CEO turns quiet takeover into healthcare revolution. From dismissed daughter to industry disruptor. But Charlotte never opened the articles. She had learned not to tether her worth to the world's reaction. The true victory wasn't in public praise. It was in private progress. She now spent her mornings walking the production floors anonymously, dressed in jeans and sneakers, asking operators about bottlenecks and engineers about new ideas. Some didn't recognize her. Others did and still spoke candidly. That was her intention. The boardroom had changed too. Where once sat a cluster of relatives with inflated titles, now sat a diverse, qualified team, many of whom had once been passed over for not having the right last name. Ava's name hadn't come up in months. Dylan had vanished from corporate circles entirely. And Charlotte's father retired quietly. He never asked for forgiveness, but sometimes sent her short emails. Not with apologies but with questions. About strategy, about growth. She always answered, briefly, professionally, and left it at that. One Thursday evening, Charlotte attended a Tech Awards gala in downtown Seattle. She was nominated but had no intention of winning. The event was packed with founders, VCs, and press. But as she sipped her mineral water at the back of the room, her name was announced. The Breakthrough Visionary Award goes to Charlotte Hayes. The applause was thunderous. Cameras flashed. But as Charlotte walked on stage, she didn't bask in it. She spoke only one sentence. "The greatest disruption I ever made was believing in myself long before anyone else did." Then she stepped down and left before dessert was served. Later that week, she received a letter, handwritten and nervous. It was from her younger cousin, Grace. "You showed me what's possible when someone refuses to fold. I want to be that person for someone else one day. I'm launching my own app. Not sure if it'll work. But thanks to you, I'm no longer afraid of trying." Charlotte read the letter 3 times. Then picked up the phone. "Emma, schedule lunch with Grace next week. And pull up her prototype." Emma hesitated. "As family." Charlotte smiled. "As an investor. Interested in real potential." As the sun dipped below the Seattle skyline, casting streaks of gold across her office windows, Charlotte stood once more in silence. The woman who had been dismissed from Thanksgiving dinner now funded innovation, rewrote corporate policy, and mentored the next generation. Her family now knew who she was. But more importantly, so did she. The people who dismiss you often do so not because of your failures, but because of their limited ability to imagine your success. Charlotte Hayes grew up believing she had to earn her family's respect by following their rules, until she realized the rules were rigged. Her quiet power didn't come from shouting louder. It came from building smarter, moving in silence, and letting her results speak volumes. When no one gave her a seat at the table, she built her own. When they locked the doors, she bought the building. The lesson: success doesn't always require validation. Sometimes it requires separation from expectations, from old narratives, from the need to be understood. You don't need to be seen to be significant. You don't need applause to make an impact. You only need to know your worth, even when no one else does. In the end, the most powerful stories are not about revenge, but about reclaiming your identity with dignity. If you've ever been underestimated by family, co-workers, or even yourself, remember Charlotte's journey. You don't have to announce every move. Quiet progress is still progress. Invest your energy into mastery, not validation. If you're starting a business, applying for jobs, or creating something new, track your wins, even the small ones. Build a proof of self file. Client reviews, milestones, screenshots of your best work. Not to show others, to remind you. And when the time comes, don't ask for a seat. Walk in knowing you own the table. You don't need revenge to win. You need clarity, confidence, and the discipline to keep going long after others stop watching. If this story hit home for you, do me one favor. Drop a comment and share your own quiet victory. What's one success you've achieved that nobody saw coming? And if you want more real, raw, and empowering stories just like this, make sure to subscribe, hit the notification bell, and join this growing community of silent disruptors. Because sometimes the best way to rise is to rise without noise. See you in the next story.